a weekend, usually a weekend seminar conference on evidence for Israelites in Egypt. And I can do it for, if anyone's interested, arrange it with, if you're the pastor with yourself, anyone else with your pastor, I'd love to come and present some of this evidence so that the people can be encouraged that the historicity in the Bible is true, it's valid, and it is able to be confirmed in a powerful way. And really, there's no more important individual event, for at least for the Israelites, in the entire Hebrew Bible than the Exodus. There's nothing like it. So you'd be amazed at the amount of evidence that's available now for Israelites in Egypt for the 430 years the Bible says they were there. So to be able to get right when various important events in the Hebrew Bible happen, when the period of the judges is the monarchy, when the conquest under Joshua takes place, when the Exodus takes place, when Jacob settles in Egypt, having moved from Canaan, all of that. If you want to get that right, you have to have a correct framework for Israelite history. And you have to have a sound chronology. Then, if there are any foreign peoples involved, and in my case, especially with my research, not that it's the only research I've done, but with Israelites in Egypt, you've got to study and get Egyptian archaeology and history and chronology right. And then, and only then, do you have a shot at synchronizing them at the right time. And I can't tell you how many times I've addressed questions about scholars out there who are trying to do this and have done a poor job with the Israelite chronology or the Egyptian chronology, or synchronizing the two, or reworking Egyptian history and chronology and so forth. And that creates way more problems than it solves, and it gets you to a place where you can't align the two correctly. So it's extremely vital that you get this right. And thankfully, chronology is important to God. It is. Why? How do we know? Well, do we not believe that the Bible is the result of dual authorship? Isn't that what sets it apart from any other book in history? It's got dual authorship. I'm not talking about, two scholars working together. I'm talking about a person, a man, and God himself working in harmony, however that worked. And it's beyond our comprehension how it worked. But the Spirit of God, according to 2 Timothy 3:16 and 2 Peter 1:21, the Spirit of God guided the biblical authors along. So the divine authorship of all of this is really important. And that being the case, where we have, let's look at, for example, in the books of Kings and Chronicles and so forth, where you have formulas used. You have a renal date for when a certain king gets on the throne. A certain year, a certain month, a certain day, this happened, right? And this happens over and over and over. Why? Are they just being overly calendar-oriented? Are they like Germans? All they care about is time and not people? No, that's not it. They care about chronology. And if the human authors of the Bible care about chronology, then if dual authorship exists, God cares about chronology. So, folks, we live in a time when, lots of good things happening in churches, without a doubt. One concern I have is when our churches are so focused on all the programs that are made, that occur to make us better individuals, right? Helping me with my problems. Yeah, guess what? My life is going to consist of problems every day, every week, and every year. I'm much more interested, I'm equally as interested as probably anybody in seeing growth take place in people, but I don't just like asking the question, what does the church do for me? What does God do for me? Why is this important to me, right? And that's one of the main questions that seminary students are asked, in reference to preaching. Okay, you need to know that it's all that's really important here is answering the question, what does this mean to the people who sit in the seats that are in the church? What does it mean to them? I'm not saying don't ask that question, but I'm saying there's something even bigger and better. What is important to God? That's the question. What is important to God? I want to become consumed with that question. What is important to Him? And if what becomes important to Him is important to me, then now God has a vessel that He can use, I think, to do amazing things. So, chronology, out of the many things that are important to God, chronology is on the list. It is. So, that being the case, it can help us understand exactly what happened in history, exactly when, and it gives us the opportunity, especially with Henry Smith and with me and Dr. Price as well, in the field of archaeology, we love seeing history brought together with events going on in the Bible. That's what we jump up and down about. Am I wrong? True? And if we want to get that right, because we could just play pin the tail on the donkey and hope that it lines up, we've got to start with chronology. It's the backbone. It's the foundation. You can't build your biblical history without a sound chronology. So that's our goal in this time together until 4:35 at the latest, building a sound Israelite chronology. So I'm an umbrella guy. Well, not really. Actually, I never use umbrellas, but for illustrations, I'm an umbrella guy. And I like to view it like this, that history overall is the umbrella under which all these subdisciplines thrive and exist and interplay with one another. At the end of the day, in addition to being a pastor and a man who wants to be a man after God's own heart, I'm a historian. I want to get the history correct. So at my disposal as a historian, especially with one who studies the biblical periods, I have all these tools at my disposal. I've got archaeology, where we're digging into the dirt and finding objects that have been hidden for thousands of years and seeing their value, where they fit, what they were used for, how they helped the people, and so forth. And then there's epigraphy, my area of expertise, which is the writings, the inscriptions that take place, that have been found, that have been, in some cases, dug up in archaeological digs, and other situations like at Serebit Yechadim. They're found on the walls of inside mines where miners were etching or inscribing into the stone. So all kinds of examples of epigraphy. Geography, aromatology, and that's the study of scents, S-C-E-N-T-S, what you smell. I have a friend who's a colleague. She's an Egyptologist, and this is her area. She's Jewish, and boy, oh boy, she knows more about smell than you can shake a stick at. It's amazing. You know what she does when she goes to museums? She gets permission to open up displays and smell. That's what she does. And of course, these are usually dead things. If they're, if they were once alive, that's what she smells. She wants to get scents. So she's making an incredible contribution. So there's that. There's iconography. That's ancient drawings. Drawings tell us things. Once we learn the conventions of what they were drawing and what they meant by certain things, it really helps us understand. And then there's chronology. There's topography, so the shaping, the contour of land, climatology, temperatures at various times of the year, various times of the day, and so forth. There's geology. And of course that, by the way, geology is the focus of the new Is Genesis History 2 film by, I forget whatever subtitle. I was just last week at Cedarville University for the premiere of this film. And there's a second premiere in Nashville that I'm going to on Thursday. So keep your eyes out. Hopefully it will be in the theaters. I think it's going to be. I don't know if I ever asked that question, but it's a really wonderful film and really powerful. So if you get a chance, be sure to look for that second Is Genesis History 2 film. And it's mainly, it's exclusively focused on geology. The first film was focused on lots of different areas of science. All right, God's love of chronological precision. And here it is, what I was alluding to. So in Genesis 1:1, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the whole point that the author is making, what he puts in what's called the emphatic position, the position of emphasis, is the time element. And the crazy part is there's so much other stuff in Genesis 1:1 that is amazing with what God did in the very beginning and how he's revealing that. With all of those amazing things that I love to talk about. I spend an hour talking about day one of creation at the minimum. The time element is most important. It's in the emphatic position. It's out of the place where it's usually put. It's put in the front of the sentence to impress on you the time element. And by the way, one of the shows that I like to watch, there are very few shows I like to watch. It's a secular show. It's called How the Universe Works. Has anyone seen How the Universe Works? A few of you? Not many. Oh, you got to check that out if you get a chance. It's amazing. Now, yeah, it's from a very secular perspective, so there's a lot you have to filter. That's no problem, right? It's like a book. You filter as you read a book. But it gives an amazing account of what we're learning now through astronomy that's never been known before, and especially with the new telescope that's now in a position to tell us even more. But what they will tell you, what they will tell you on several episodes is that the beginning of things, and they'll never use the word creation, of course, but the beginning of things in the universe and time go hand in hand. Isn't that awesome? Secular astronomers understand that. And I have news for you. Newsflash. It's in the Bible. Genesis 1:1. There it is. When in the one-of-a-kind beginning, the King of the gods who exists in plurality created the cosmos, the universe. ... That's one. Then two. Then the earth. He did all of that at the beginning of creation. When did it occur time-wise? In the one-of-a-kind beginning. There's no other beginning. So there aren't multiple universes. It's one of a kind. So the multiverse concept, it's really cool for the Avengers. But in life, won't happen. It's against what Genesis 1:1 says. God's love for chronology. He loved it so much that he had Moses start the sentence out of the ordinary by putting a prepositional phrase there that's adverbial that should come later after the verb, but it comes in the beginning. In the one-of-a-kind beginning. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim v'et ha'aretz. It's at the very beginning. Jeremiah 52:31, another example. And this is what I referred to before. Now it came about in year 37 of the exile of Jehoiachin, not Kim, but Chin, king of Judah, in month 12 on day 25 of the month. You see how specific this is? Year, month, day. Boom. Exactly. That's important to the biblical writer because it's important to God. Time is important. He created time. Without time, folks, the resurrection is a story and nothing more. At a point in time in history, the Son of God died a sacrificial death on a piece of wood for the salvation of mankind. Without that moment in time, it's all fantasy. It's only because Jesus physically at a moment of time resurrected from the dead and God raised him up that we are able to have hope in our resurrection. Time is critical to God. It's critical to history. It's critical to the Word of God. It's got to be important to us. All right. Establishing a chronological framework for Israelite history. Is this possible? So let's begin with selecting a chronological scheme in general. So historical study, including archaeology, can make a contribution to biblical studies only if its findings can be synchronized with biblical chronology. Otherwise, we're just kind of floating out there in time. It's got to be rooted with a tent peg in the ground, and that's what chronology does. Fortunately, this is often quite possible. There are two main chronological schemes for the Hebrew Bible, followed by biblical scholars and laymen. There's the scheme created by James Ussher way back when, and the one more recently in the 20th century by Edwin Thiele. And Thiele, of course, was a Seventh-day Adventist. And by the way, Seventh-day Adventists are really, really good with chronology. I love their commitment to precision with chronology. So they are heroes of mine. Ussher's scheme is more popularly used, but it is problematic. Thiele's scheme is far more precise. All right, so if you want to study this issue further, and we're not going to talk much about it, but you can go to several sources. One is a dear friend, Roger Young, his writing, his journal article of 2018 in Bible and Spade, and there was a number of us, Henry, I don't know if you remember, we were pushing him, right, to write this, something on Ussher, to show the flaws in Ussher's system. And so he wrote an article called Ussher Explained and Corrected. So you can get that either from his academia.edu webpage or from his own personal website, or maybe even somewhere else from Bible and Spade, wherever. But it's worth reading to be able to see the arguments for the flaws in that system, and to demonstrate why it's not a system that you want to use as a framework. But the framework you probably should use, IMHO, in my humble opinion, is Edwin Thiele's, based on this book that you see the picture of, The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings. This is extremely important. Now, it's very detailed. It's very methodical. Lots of abstract, lots of, if you're an accountant, you probably would love it. The rest of us, it's work to get through his book. But bottom line is, you've got to get it right. You've got to get the numbers right. If you're going to crunch the numbers, get it right. He does in large part. So Ussher lived from, wrong way. There we go. Ussher lived from 1581 to 1656. Thiele lived from 1895 to 1986. So you can see that he died fairly recently. Thiele's scheme has been refined slightly by Roger Young, who published several vital articles on the chronology of the Hebrew Bible. And you can find all those articles that he's written that are chronological on his website or his academia.edu webpage. Download for free. For the advanced student, reading Thiele's book and Young's articles provide the needed foundation for anyone to make a career in the field of biblical history. And that's right. Guess why? Because I'm one. I studied them both, and I found them to be not necessarily without any possible flaw, but exceedingly persuasive and powerful. So to this day, all the archaeological work I've done, which is very, very precise in some cases. I mean, there are events that happen that, according to biblical chronology, the event that happened, I mean, there's a window of 1 year of time to spare. 1 year. And otherwise, it's off, and the chronology's messed up. But it does work, even if it's within a year. And so it's that precise. So everything I keep testing, right? As a researcher, I keep testing and testing that chronological framework. It keeps showing up 777. It looks like it's right. And if it's right, it will be proven that way through diligent research and study. So just to put some figures on events in time, and let's go back in time from our day forward. So we start at the bottom here, and let me give you, just in case I need it, let me give you the pointer of the laser pointer here. So 587, that's when Jerusalem falls to Nebuchadnezzar and the Neo-Babylonian invaders. That final destruction begins in 587. 967, and that's the year that's important to us to build a scheme that takes us earlier than this. This is when the construction on the first temple begins, and this is related to 1 Kings 6:1. Then we go back to 1406. The Israelites cross into Canaan, and by the way, I don't have it here, but 1400 is when many of us are convinced that the conquest under Joshua officially ends. It doesn't mean the work is done. It doesn't mean they have all the control of Canaan like they should. In fact, they're really not carrying out God's instruction faithfully. That's the bottom line. But it officially ends in 1400. 1446 is the Israelite exodus from Egypt, and that is proven over and over and over again in many of my writings, many of Roger Young's writings, many of Henry's probably, and Bryant Wood's and those of others. 1805 is the approximate year of Joseph's burial at the site of Dashur. You say, how do you know he's buried at Dashur? And, well, guess what? You have to read my book. It's in my 2021 book. So look around, see who has one, kind of sneak your way and take it away and find out the answer. 1876, that's when Jacob moves his family to Egypt. And so that's our other tent peg. I don't have it highlighted here, but 967 and three tent pegs. 967, 1446, and then 1876. And we can be sure about the 1876 number if we do the study on Exodus 12, 40, and 41, that chronological passage that we looked at earlier today. And if you conclude, as I've concluded, that it's 430 years of life in Egypt only, then 1876 becomes correct. But if you go with the short sojourn view and you say the entry of the Israelites into Egypt happened in 1661 BC, then guess what you have to do if you have integrity to believe that? You have to take my first book and my second book and refute all of it. And that's a task. That took me thousands of hours of research for each book. So more power to you if you can do that. And then 2066 is when Isaac was born to Sarah and Gerar. 2091, approximately when Abram enters Canaan. On that long journey that begins at Ur, stopping point at Haran, at the top of the Fertile Crescent, if you will, and then down into the Levant. And 2166 is the birth of Abram in Mesopotamia. So those are some of the years of events that happen. How do we know this? Because of the very few chronological passages in the Hebrew Bible that give us important chronological detail that can move us from a certain point back in time and keep going back. And then once we get back to that time, there's what we call relative dating. So once we have the year 1876 established, for example, is when Jacob moves into Egypt, now we can look at other events surrounding that are related to it. For example, if you go on into the text of the narrative of the story between Genesis 37 and 50 about Jacob's time in Egypt, it says that he lived 17 years in Egypt after he arrived. So it's easy math, folks. You don't have to use, advanced calculus for this. 1876 minus 17 years is 1859. So that's when he dies. He dies in 1859. So you can relative date lots of other events if you have a tent peg date, such as 1876. All right, so the first chronological tent peg is 1 Kings 6:1. Israelite history's foundational biblical text for establishing a firm chronology is 1 Kings 6:1. My translation, for good or bad. Now it came about in the 480th year after the sons of Israel departed from the land of Egypt. There it is, year 4, month 2, the month Ziv, of Solomon's reign over Israel, that he, that is Solomon, and his builders began to build the temple belonging to he who is. So if we know the date for when they started the building of that temple, the first temple, the Jews call it the first temple. Usually in Christendom we use the term Solomonic temple. Personally, my favorite is the temple of he who is, because that's what is described in the Bible. And really, the temple belongs to the God who occupies it, not to anyone else. That's his house. In fact, the word used in Hebrew is house. Beit Yahweh, house of he who is. So, year 4, month 2 of Solomon's reign. Synchronisms between Neo-Assyria and the kings of the northern kingdom of Israel are firmly established, giving absolute dates to moments in their reigns for which the Bible provides relative dates. Currently, no such synchronisms exist between Assyrian records and the southern kingdom of Judah, but internal synchronisms between Israelite and Judite kings and their lines allows reliable dates to be established all the way back to the reigns of David and Solomon. Thus, year 4, month 2 of Solomon equates to 967 BC. And that's in the literature. You can study Roger Young's writings and those of others, such as Eugene Merrill, if you really want to look at why we can be certain about 967 BC. We can be. There are other views out there, but I think the evidence very clearly leads to 967. That's when Solomon begins the building of the temple of God. So the same verse provides a relative date for the Israelite exodus from Egypt. So that's quite convenient. The Israelite inspired author made it easy to take us way back into the second millennium BC from our perspective, time-wise. And it says clearly that this took place in the 480th year after Israel departed from the land of Egypt. And if it's the 480th year, that means if we're counting coins, it's 479, and the Russian word is milach. It's pocket change, 479 in pocket change that we go back from 967. And where do we land? 1446. So this number signifies an elapsed time of 479 plus years from the Exodus, giving a date of 1446 BC as the year that the Israelites left Egypt. And Roger Young is very, very careful about studying and examining and again, putting on trial that year of 1446 to make sure it's right. There are outside witnesses that attest to this as being correct. You can study what he wrote about it. One of them being the Jubilee cycles, which we know when they ended, and they go back very, very systematically all the way to 1406. And what is 1406? Who remembers? The year of, they crossed the Jordan in the beginning of the conquest. So if the Jubilee cycles that are not part of Scripture, right? So it's extra biblical. It's not part of the Bible. If they give us 1406 as the year of the conquest, and the Israelites are, wandering around in the desert for 40 years, that means the Exodus has to be in 1446. So there's an outside witness attesting to the veracity of 1446 as the right year of the Exodus. All right, so a quick review here. So there's a variant reading, wouldn't you know, in 1 Kings 8:1, and I'm going to just kind of walk through in a quick manner through this, but if you want the more gory details, they are in a document that I've uploaded to my academia.edu webpage. You can look at the full textual solution to that problem there. So variant 1, it says the 480th year after the Exodus. The witnesses attesting to this are the Hebrew Masoretic text, specifically the Leningrad Codex, and the Latin Vulgate, that relatively early translation, late in the sense of the Israelite period, but early in the sense of church history at least. Variant 2, it says the 440th year after the Exodus. Well, the bad news for this view is that there is no Hebrew textual support at all. Not one Hebrew manuscript says to us that it was in the 440th year after the Exodus that they began the building of the temple. The one source that does have it is the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that, again, goes back to somewhere around 275 BC. And this is a quote from Edwin Thiele, pages 90 to 94. The Masoretic text has repeatedly been demonstrated to be the best witness to the Old Testament text. Any deviation from it, therefore, requires justification. I'm sorry, that was Ernst Wertwein. Then, the Septuagint has been shown to be inferior to the Masoretic text in chronological matters, and that you can access from Thiele's book, pages 90 to 94. Sorry. Okay, with that being true, the antiquity of the Septuagint renders its text important for determining the originality of any variation in the Hebrew Bible. So if the Septuagint has a certain reading and it's different than the Masoretic text, it needs to be taken seriously. You can't just blow it off because it's Greek and not Hebrew. It may be recording and transmitting the right original reading. Therefore, there must remain the possibility that the Septuagint correctly preserves the original number as 440th year after, for the time between the Exodus and the beginning of the building of the first temple. However, the Masoretic text preserved by the Hebrew scribes carries with it greater authority than any ancient version, including the Septuagint. And also, there are other reasons that I talk about in my full breakdown of this textual variant. One being the historical one. Remember our source, our extra-biblical source, the Jubilee cycles. Now things are off with the Jubilee cycles if it's 440th and not 480th year. So that is a major problem. If the Jewish scribes were correct in their careful recording of the timing of each Jubilee cycle, then you have to suggest that somewhere along the way they made a mistake and it's not preserved correctly in their recording of that. All right, variant 1, the 480th year, pro 1. There's no reason exists to suspect any accidental error on the part of a Hebrew scribe as the reason for the appearance of 480th year in 1 Kings 6:1 in the Masoretic text. So the reading 480th, there's no simple scribal mistake that can account for this. No accidental change. If there's any change that the scribe makes, it's intentional. It's a scribal change that he thinks he's justified in correcting a mistake. And that very well may be what's going on here to alter it from 480th, in my view, to 440th. Egyptian history based on the preferable high chronology view, and that's now, we're talking about Egyptian chronology. How do we know when certain events happened in Egyptian history related to the Bible? Well, it just so happens coincidentally that there are two extremely important papyri, one from the lifetime of Joseph in the 12th dynasty and one from the lifetime of Moses in the 18th dynasty. That's the Ebers papyrus in the case of Moses' lifetime, and a Lahun papyrus from the time period of Joseph. They give astronomical dating information that allow us to put on a timeline, and that is absolute dating, which we're used to, right? We're used to absolute dating. I gave you a whole list of absolute dates. They provide tent pegs for Egyptian history, bam, right in the 12th and 18th dynasties to give us a time frame. And there is a window of difference within that of 25 years. The high chronology view, the middle chronology view, and the low chronology view, the variance is 25 years. So that's all the variable there is, which is not much. That's very marginal when you talk about so far back in time. But the high chronology view, I try to prove in my 2021 book, Origins of the Hebrews, that is the right view to hold. It's the only view that has support from the ancient Egyptians themselves, because it gives witness or testimony to what's called a Memphite observation of the rising of the Sothic star. Doesn't that bless you? Man, that is a blessing from the Lord. So, high chronology view, I'm convinced, is the right view. And it shows that Amenhotep II was the ruling pharaoh in 1446. So that kind of is what started me on this long process to where I am today. I first wanted to know and study out who was the right candidate for the Exodus pharaoh. And really, there are numerous biographical requirements for the Exodus pharaoh. And I won't go through the whole list. It's in my book. It's in my 2006 journal article. One of them is that his predecessor had to rule over 40 years, according to Luke. So if that's true, then it limits the field greatly who this could be. And so there are other qualifications, other requirements. And so it's like being a prophet in ancient Israel. You've got to get it right 100% of the time. The biographical requirements for the Exodus pharaoh, if you identify him with confidence, every single biographical requirement in the Bible should prove true, Or maybe it's one that you just can't find the answer to, and that's okay if that's the case. But every qualification I used to put Amenhotep II to the test, right, Dakimadzo, I put him to the test, and he passed every single qualification. He even passed one qualification that I had a different view on before I approached it, which is I thought that the Bible said that the Exodus Pharaoh dies in the Sea of Reeds with his army, until I studied it in Hebrew, right? First, I was convinced Amenhotep II is the guy, and I learned that he ruled probably into about his 37th year or so, and I found out too that he died in his year. I'm sorry, that the death of his army in the Sea of Reeds happened in his 7th year. So that being true, there's 30 years of life he has after that debacle. So I was really nervous when I realized that, when it came to mind, and I thought, wow. But in Sunday school, I learned that he died with his army. So I studied the text, and guess what I found? Sunday school was wrong. Sometimes our teachers don't get it right. They tried their hardest. They teach what they were taught, but somebody has to study it out. And in my studying it, I concluded, okay, it looks like history is forcing me, right? The synchronism of Egyptian and Israelite history is forcing me to study an issue I never knew was an issue. And I studied the issue, and I found out, wow, it doesn't say that at all. It doesn't say that he died. The verb that's used is the verb that's used of flicking off a locust from your shoulder. That's the verb that's used. And King David uses that of Saul's attempts to take his life. Did Saul kill David? No. This happened to David. Saul brushed him off of his shoulder, but that's about it. So the Exodus Pharaoh, does he die? I'm convinced that he doesn't, and we need to readdress our position on that. So, based on the astronomical chronological information obtained from the Ebers Papyrus, a medical document with a dating, let's see, I don't know what I just did. There we go. A medical document with the dating of the rising of the Sothic star alongside the renal date of Amenhotep I. So that astronomical dating isn't to the reign of Amenhotep II, it's to Amenhotep I, who lived earlier in the dynasty. And so if we know how long each of his successors ruled, then we can get correct the renal dates, the time that Amenhotep II, the Exodus Pharaoh, actually ruled. So, all that to say, then, Amenhotep II's reign would have been from 1453 to 1416. And what is our year for the Exodus? 1446. So it fits in that window. So he's the first candidate we really want to look at carefully and scrutinize his reign, which is, again, what I did years ago. He's the only king of Dynasty 18 with a predecessor who ruled over 40 years. Isn't that useful? There's no other candidate in the 18th dynasty who ruled over 40 years to be his predecessor. So if you believe in the late Exodus view, I won't ask for a raise of hands if anyone does. I don't want to put you on the spot or, put you in a position where I'm going to hunt you down after the lecture and try to persuade you otherwise. No, hold your view. For whatever reasons you hold it, that's fine. But what was I going to say? Lost my train of thought. I need my students here to help me. When I lose my train of thought, my students always put me right back on track. The late Exodus view. Yeah, the late Exodus view. Thank you. That view holds that Ramses II was the Exodus Pharaoh. He ruled well over 40 years, but what about his predecessor, Seti I? Did he rule over 40 years? No, long short of it. So what happens to Ramses II? Bzzz. He loses. He fails. His predecessor didn't rule over 40 years in Egypt. So he can't be the right candidate. Not to spoil Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments for you. I used to watch that every Easter, and I cried every time I watched it. When Moses did this, God parted the waters, the waters came down. I'm a Serbian. We're very emotional people. We're very passionate people. We cry at anything. So, Amenhotep II is the only king of Dynasty 18 with a predecessor who ruled over 40 years, which is a biographical requirement based on, and there are the verses, Acts 7:23 and Acts 7:30. Compare that with Exodus 2:32. So if you want to check it for yourself, check it. Make sure I'm not imposing something on the text which isn't there. Con. What's a con to this view, variant 2? First con is in Acts 13:20, the phrase about 450 years in the text of Paul's exhortation in the synagogue at Pisidian Antioch is more difficult to reconcile with the historical and chronological details if using the Septuagint's number 440th in 1 Kings 6:1 than is the Masoretic text number of the 480th. See my Acts 13:20 variant resolution on academia.edu for more details on that. And you can also look at the discussion by Andrew Steinman in his book. And by the way, if you're going to buy just one book on biblical chronology, let it be the book of Andrew Steinman, 2011. It's worth its weight in gold. If biblical chronology means anything to you, get it. Now, he's not right on everything, in my opinion. Several things he's wrong on. And most, in my opinion, of what he's wrong on relates to the Egyptian sojourn, what's going on in there. It's not quite precise. But it is what it is. It's still an excellent, excellent source. But you can consult his book for more. Another con for variant 2, the 480th year after the Exodus, is according to variant 2, the Israelite Exodus thus would date between April 1406 and April 1405. A date of 1406 for the Exodus would mean that Amenhotep III was, I'm sorry, this is for the 440th year, not for the 480th year. That Amenhotep III was the reigning Egyptian king at the time of the Exodus. However, Amenhotep III is not an acceptable candidate for the Exodus pharaoh. For lots of reasons. For one thing, his father, Thutmose IV, almost certainly reigned for 10 years or less, although the exact length of his reign is uncertain. But a long reign is impossible for Thutmose IV. It's absolutely impossible. No Egyptologist holds that he reigned over 10 years, that I know of. Thutmose IV thus would be an impossible candidate for the predecessor of the Exodus pharaoh, who must have ruled over 40 years. So that's a problem with the 440th year view. Another problem, if the Exodus occurred in 1406, then the Israelites did not enter Canaan until approximately 1366 BC. But the Amarna letters date from year 30 of Amenhotep III, which is 1378, 1377 BC, through the reign of his son, Amenhotep IV, known to most people as Akhenaten, who ruled approximately 1370 to 1353. And Akhenaten ruled after him. These tablets record attacks by Apiru. Who are the Apiru? The Apiru are equivalent to the Habiru. Apiru is the Egyptian word. Habiru is the Akkadian word. And the Akkadian word Habiru is related to the Hebrew word Hebrew, which originally comes from the name Aber, which I'm going to try to argue eventually in writing, that originally there wasn't a guttural consonant there, but there was the H consonant there, the H. Before Abram would have left Mesopotamia, Abram would have spoken it, that they were Hivrim. Hivrim. So what are the consonants there? Take away the plural ending, H, B or V, and R. Exactly what we see in Habiru. Okay? So, that's a problem. That is Eberite Hebrews. Since Hebrews, that is Habiru, that is Apiru, derived from Aber, originally Heber, who had to have sufficient time for the conquest under Joshua that would have ended in 1360 BC, before the mop-up operations that are recorded in the Amarna letters. This simply is not enough time for the rest that took place after Joshua's conquest, plus all that is recorded in the Amarna letters about the Apiru, such as what happened with Chatzor, and that's also in my writings as well. So the evidence makes a strong case in favor of the view that the gap between the Exodus and the beginning of construction on the first temple spanned 479 plus years rather than 439 plus years. In light of all the evidence that can be gleaned from a careful study of ancient history and chronology, which proves to be irreparably damaging to the 440th year variant, the internal evidence favors variant 1, 480th year, conclusively. So again, look at my uploaded academia source for more. Both external and internal evidence point to variant 1. So the evidence comes from both areas. And again, it's all the better if external and internal work together to draw you to the same conclusion. So the reading of 480th year as the original reading is the one that should be used in 1 Kings 6:1. The reading in the Septuagint cannot supplant the reading of the Masoretic text here, as there is no evidence that compels this variant to be preferred. And again, the fact that it's in no Hebrew manuscript at all is a challenging problem for the view as well. Moreover, the historical evidence related to the internal evidence clearly makes the reading of 440th year highly implausible, if not completely impossible. So, what do you do at the end of the day? I suggest choose variant 1 in a landslide. Go with 480th year, before the building of the temple began under Solomon, as the time when the Exodus occurs. Roger Young's articles confirm 1446 BC as the correct year of the Exodus by corroborating evidence from extra-biblical sources, including the Jubilee cycles, which are recorded in the Seder Olam. Also, he discusses the evidence of the Tyrian king list and the Parian marble. See page 22 of Origins of the Hebrews, where I discuss that at greater length, or go straight to his articles. On page 23 of Origins of the Hebrews, I show how the date of the first Passover can be calculated even more precisely, which is always fun, right? Even greater precision, to the exact date of Friday, the 24th of April, 1446 BC, based on the reference to Nisan 14 in Exodus 12:6. So on Friday, the 24th of April, when the sun set, the day began for the Hebrews, right? Because that's when the day starts, at sunset. So that day begins at sunset. What happens that evening? They eat not a feast, but a little bit from the sacrificial animals. They put the blood on the lintels of the door, and they're saved. They're preserved from dying from destruction through the death angel. And then that same Hebrew day, in the morning, what do? Leave Egypt that same day. So that then becomes the 25th in our terminology of April for when they actually depart from Egypt. All right, the second chronological tent peg, and we've looked at this. I may skip a little faster. We'll see. Exodus 12:40 and 41. The date of the Israelites' entry into Egypt under Jacob is found in Exodus 12:40 and 41. This happened in 1876 BC if you deal with the textual variants correctly. So the reading of the Masoretic text, and just to look at these briefly, we can do this for sure. Now the residing of the sons of Israel during which they resided in Egypt is 430 years. That's the reading I prefer. Variant, in this case, 2a, the reading of the Septuagint says, and the residing of the sons of Israel during which they resided in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan is 430 years. Once again, the chronology is out of order here. They would have been in Canaan first and then in Egypt if you're counting years in the reigns, in the lives of the patriarchs who preceded Jacob, such as Isaac and Abraham. Then the Samaritan Pentateuch is a variation of that reading in the Septuagint, which says, now the residing of the sons of Israel and their fathers during which they resided in the land of Canaan and in the land of Egypt, in chronological order, by the way, is 430 years. So I love that reading, variant 2b. I love it, but it's wrong. There is no in the land of Canaan. And again, I argue this more more vehemently, if you will, more strongly in my 2019 article on the exact length of the sojourn in Egypt. There's the reference to it if you're interested in the source. Determining the precise length of the Israelite sojourn in Egypt, NEAS B, issue 64, 2019, pages 21 to 41. So this article demonstrates that the 430 years describes the Israelite sojourn in Egypt alone. From these three dates, 1876, 1446, and 967, a large part of history recorded in the Hebrew Bible can be plugged into this chronological framework with a high level of confidence. Moreover, datable archaeological finds can be harmonized chronologically with biblical history, even those obtained by carbon-14 testing, though only if factoring the offset of 1400 BC into the equation. Many people in the field still today don't know about the chronological offset of 1400 BC that was discovered by Egyptologists working at Avaris, the site where Jacob settled. And there it was demonstrated that radiocarbon-14 evidence, which, by the way, works perfectly going back in time all the way to 1400. So, say, for example, the Bible indicates that in 701 BC, Hezekiah would have opposed the attack by Sennacherib and the Neo-Assyrian army. Evidence from plant matter found inside the plastered walls of Hezekiah's tunnel that had to be built as part of the defense mechanism to prevent Assyrian attack. That plant matter dates to such a period that it's right in the window of, in fact, the secular Jewish scholars who did the work said, we find, and to paraphrase, we find that the date for the plant matter is 700 BC or slightly earlier. What does the Bible say? 701 BC. In the journal article I published on Kirbeit Kayafa, which was a site occupied, it was a military outpost near Judah's flank, western flank, near the border with the Philistines. It was inhabited for only about 30 years of time or so, and I attempt to prove that the carbon-based material, the organic material, connected to the destruction of the city, has its window of time, its range of time, right around the very same time that the Bible would indicate. The Bible would indicate that David becomes king of all Israel in 1002 BC, and the destruction of Kirbeit Kayafa is around 990. 990 BC, and that fits perfectly with the archaeological evidence. And again, you can look at my article on that for more. It's on my academia.edu webpage. Just look for Kirbeit Kayafa, those words, and you'll find it. So, in 700 BC, it fits perfectly. In 1000 BC, it fits perfectly. When you compare radiocarbon evidence with the evidence from what's called historical archaeological dating. And that being the case, if you go back further to 1400 BC and earlier, now you get an offset. And the radiocarbon material is saying, I'm older, and the historical archaeological evidence is saying, no, I'm younger, I'm more recent. And the further you go back in time, the more the offset becomes exponential. So that's an important factor in all of this. And it just keeps growing as you go back in time, by the way. So, to the zealous, dare I say, fundamentalist Christians out there who look at carbon-14 evidence and they say, we need to vilify all of it, right? And call it all terrible paganism. No. You need to understand it. You need to use it and compare it with evidence from the Bible, from ancient history, from archaeological finds, and see for yourself how it works. And then maybe you're in a position where you're ready to judge it. But before that, be careful about just dismissing scientific evidence. That's not integrity, folks. That's romanticism. That's what it is. So just be careful. Please. Okay, Egyptian chronological scheme. So we want to connect Israelite chronology with Egyptian chronology. So the first intermediate period is about 2170 to 2025 BC. The Old Kingdom before this, the dates for it are a little bit on the elusive side. I haven't really in my own mind settled, so I didn't include it here. 2025 to 1674 is the Middle Kingdom. When does Joseph live? In the Middle Kingdom. Dynasties, part of Dynasty 11, Dynasty 12, and part of Dynasty 13 fit within that time frame of the Middle Kingdom. 1668 to 1560, it's the second intermediate period. I was talking with a few of you at the break. The Hyksos, remember I was talking about them? The Hyksos rule in Egypt from 1668 to 1560, and they're kicked out. They're killed or kicked out, depending on the individual Hyksos, in 1560 BC. And that's what you read about in Exodus 1, where the king of Egypt arose who did not know of Joseph. That was Amosa the first of the 18th dynasty. He's the last king of the 17th dynasty, first king of the 18th dynasty. And he's fearful that the Israelites who are there at Avaris and have lived through this decades-long war between the native Egyptians of the 17th dynasty and the Hyksos of the 15th and 16th dynasties, he's afraid that because his army, after those decades of war, they're so devastated by warfare. Imagine decades of war. I mean, that would just decimate your population, especially your male population in antiquity. And so he's afraid, and what he's afraid of is that the Israelites will go to the surviving Hyksos who fled to Canaan, and they shacked up at a place called Sharuhen, almost certainly in southern Canaan, and the surviving Hyksos were there. That king was afraid, Amosa, he was afraid the Israelites would run away in their great number, outnumbering the Egyptians who survived that warfare, would join themselves to the Hyksos in Canaan, would be given weapons, taught how to use them, and all of them would come back and destroy that dynasty that was hurt by the war. So what did he do? He enslaved them. That's when it takes place, in 1560. So somebody asked me at the break, how long did the enslavement in Egypt happen? Oh, that's easy, 114 years. 1560 to 1446, that's the period of the enslavement. So from 1876 to 1560 BC, the Israelites are sitting pretty. And that's what the archaeological evidence at Avaris shows. They became richer and richer and richer and richer. What was their main source of income? Well, some of you aren't going to like this. Wine. They imported wine from Canaan in enormous supply, and they sold it, making income to those who lived in other parts of Egypt and maybe even other parts of Africa. They were middlemen, making a huge amount of money from the Canaanites and the people of the Levant. So then 1560 to 1069 is the New Kingdom. 1069 to 633 is the third intermediate period, dynasties 21 to 25. So Moses, dynasty 18, that's in the New Kingdom. Joseph, dynasty 12, that's in the Middle Kingdom. So the dating tools for accomplishing this are the Lahun Papyrus 10012 for the 12th dynasty and the Ebers Medical Papyrus for dynasty 18. And again, you can consult my book for more on that. All right, chronology from Babel to Abram in our last 7 to 8 minutes, somewhere in that vicinity. This is the post-Diluvian world. That's the problem. You speak on chronology, what happens? Time gets away from you, right? And that's exactly what happened. Can somebody turn back the clock? 5 minutes? Okay. Pastor Rob says 5 minutes. Let's see what we can do in 5 minutes. So I'm going to come out with a book, Lord willing, if I live long enough. In some years, whenever I'm to it, I've got 2 to publish first, and then I'll get, hopefully, to finishing that book on biblical history of the 3rd millennium BC. And in that book, I will talk about various things, one of those being the Tower of Babel dispersion, and I will try to argue strongly, persuasively, that event of the post-Babel dispersion, when people, God confuses languages and people can't communicate, what do? They run from each other. That can be tracked archaeologically. And it can be connected to a movement, an outward movement of people from southern Mesopotamia called the Late Uruk expansion. And that takes place roughly in 2625 BC from where I'm sitting today. I don't know if that number will change, but if it does, it won't be by much, probably. Then 2320 is when we have the beginning of the reign of Sargon of Akkad, the first empire builder. What empire did he build? Akkadian. He built the Akkadian Empire. And it's, again, the first empire of the world. Moses, I'm convinced, talks about this cryptically by use of a name different than Sargon, but it's the same individual, and his name is Nimrod. Out of everything I've uploaded to academia.edu, nothing is accessed more than the article I published on Nimrod. I don't know why. Yeah, and disputed more. But I think it's a really impenetrable case to connect Sargon of Akkad with Nimrod. So I'm writing a book actually on that right now, and hopefully it'll be the next book that I publish in a small paperback and cheaper format than the other dates we talked about. So where can you get more information about sources dating from even further back, the universal flood to the 3rd millennium BC? There's the article that Henry Smith wrote together with Jeremy Sexton, Primeval Chronology Restored, Revisiting the Genealogies of Genesis 5 and 11 in Bible and Spade, 2016. Roger Young's article I already mentioned about Usher, and then my forthcoming book, If I Live to See the Day. All right, biblical chronology and the radiocarbon offset. You know what? That's going to take at least 15 to 20 minutes. So I think I'll just park the car right here and see if any of you has a question for me.
Could you go back to the last slide?
Yes, sir.
The one with all the dates?
Does he need a microphone?
Before that.
Yeah, he needs a microphone.
Okay.
The dates.
Oh.
One back.
Yep.
There you go.
What happened in 1526?
Ooh, I don't think we have power to the mic.
Oh,
He turned it up. No, you turned it off.
I did not. I don't turn this off.
I didn't mean to get you in trouble.
Could you go back? Yeah, that slide right there. It was just like, okay, 1526, birth of Moses. Okay, in Egypt. Okay, good. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, now I've got a penetrating question on this. You've got 1446 for the Exodus.
Yes, sir.
So did Gene Merrill. Okay? You've got 967. You said Merrill had it. No, he doesn't. I just looked it up in both my early first edition and what's on Logos, and he's got 966.
Oh.
And I always see 586 for Babylon, and you have 587.
Yeah.
You consistently see this 1 year difference in a lot of chronologies.
Yeah. And
Explain that.
yeah.
Because that's a problem. I mean, they're good on everything else, and then there's going to be 1 or 2 dates that are 1 year off.
What did Adam do when God came to him with a problem? He pointed to Eve. So I'm going to point you to Roger Young.
I'm going to disagree with you. He pointed to God through Eve. He said, it's the woman you gave me.
Right, yeah. Incriminating God for it. So in the articles, that Roger Young published, he is the one that convinced me that 967 is the right year for the construction building beginning, and that 587 actually is when the beginning of the campaign against the Judites happens with Jerusalem under Nebuchadnezzar. So,
yeah, but I always run into this. I've read Keeley, I've read Roger Young, I look at Unger. You know, I had him for Theological.
I didn't.
We're having our personal argument. Y'all just can not listen in. But anyway, I'm waiting for him to give an answer for this 1 year thing, because I keep running into it and nobody has an answer.
Yeah, Roger Young does.
Oh, okay.
His
Well,
articles
let's get
are
him on the
place to go.
phone.
Let's get him on the phone. He's
All right.
he's in our time zone.
All right, that was great, and I want to reiterate what he said. Chronology really matters, and that's from a person for whom I believe deeply that numbers are a cult. I'm a liberal arts guy. I am not a numbers guy.